When my daughter married, I chose silence. My late husband had left me $80 million worth of beachfront villas scattered along the Carolina coast. I kept that truth to myself, and I am thankful I did, because only a week later my new son-in-law walked into my kitchen with a lawyer by his side, thinking they could take it all from me. That is where my story begins. But before I continue, let me ask you something. If stories like mine touch your heart, if you believe in the kind of strength that speaks quietly but firmly, and in justice that doesn't shout but stands unshaken, then please like this video, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell. Your support keeps voices like mine alive and builds a community of people who know what it means to protect dignity. Now let me return to that day. The day silence protected me. It began at my daughter's wedding. A lavish reception held in one of Charleston's oldest ballrooms, all glittering chandeliers and polished wooden floors. Guests floated about in gowns and tuxedos. The music played softly, laughter rose louder. When I entered, wearing a dress pinned with a small corsage, I noticed immediately where they had seated me. Table 14 by the emergency exit, half hidden behind a towering display of white orchids. I sat down quietly, smoothed the fabric across my lap, and watched my daughter Clara step into the room in her gown. She was radiant. She was mine. Yet I was placed as though I were an afterthought, my face obscured in photographs that would later circle through family albums and social media. It wasn't an accident. Families don't make accidents like that. Till I smiled. I clapped when others clapped. I raised my glass when the toast was given. Inside, though, something broke. I thought of all the nights I had sat by her bed when she was feverish, whispering comfort until sleep carried her away. Of the evenings I stayed up late, grading my students' papers by the dim glow of a lamp near her crib. Those memories, my years of devotion, were invisible to everyone there. That was the role they had given me in her new life. So I stayed silent. I said nothing of the villas her father, Daniel, had built with his hands and his grit. He called them his houses of wind and salt. 20 years of contracts, repairs after hurricanes, and sweat poured into a chain of properties stretching from Myrtle Beach to Hilton Head. Before his final breath, he placed every deed in a trust, my name at its center. I can still see him in those last days. His hand, rough and calloused, gripping mine with surprising strength. His voice low and urgent. "Margaret," he said, "don't tell anyone. Don't sign anything. One day you'll understand." At the time I didn't. Now I do. Because a week after the wedding I heard a knock at my door. Standing there was Ethan, my brand new son-in-law, his shirt pressed crisp, his smile too polished to be true. Beside him stood a man in a dark suit holding a briefcase, a lawyer. "Mother," Ethan began, his tone smooth, practiced. "We thought we'd stop by to help you with some paperwork, just to make sure you're safe now that you're on your own." They followed me into the kitchen. I set my teacup on the table, its steam curling upward. The lawyer slid a thick folder across the wood. Bold black letters printed on the cover. "Durable power of attorney." Ethan smiled again, resting his hand lightly on the folder. "It's just a formality. Clara and I want to make sure you're cared for, that nothing ever goes wrong with the villas, the bank accounts, everything your husband left behind." My spoon tapped against the cup with a small metallic chime. The sound was soft, but it rang inside me like a bell. That sound told me the truth. They weren't here to protect me. They were here to strip me of everything Daniel had worked to preserve. I looked at the folder. I looked at Ethan. And I said nothing. Once again, silence became my armor. That is where the real story begins. So let me tell you who I am, so you understand the woman sitting at that kitchen table with a lawyer's folder pushed across the wood. My name is Margaret Ellison. I am 67 years old. For most of my life, I taught elementary school in Charleston, South Carolina. I taught children how to read their first sentences, how to count the apples on a page, how to stand at the front of the classroom and say their names with confidence. Patience was my profession. Dignity was my compass. Now I live alone in a modest two-story house painted the pale blue Daniel once called seagrass. The shutters are white, though the paint has begun to peel at the edges. Out front, I tend a small garden where roses climb a trellis Daniel built for me years ago. The roses are stubborn. Even when storms beat them down, they return in spring with a fragrance that reminds me of the vows we made when we were young. Inside my home, everything has its place. The kettle sits polished on the stove, its whistle softened from decades of use. A row of teacups hangs neatly above the sink. In the hallway on a shelf, rests a small metal safe, Daniel's old one, scarred from years of being hauled between job sites. Inside are more than deeds and documents. It holds our history, photographs with curled edges, letters Daniel wrote when work kept him away, Clara's birth certificate. It is not just a container for paper. It is the vault of our life. The key never leaves me. Heavy brass, always warm from my body, it lives in the pocket of my cardigan. When nerves creep in, I curl my hand around it as though I am holding Daniel's hand again. It is not just metal. It is reassurance. Every morning I brew tea before the sun has fully risen. Out of habit I set 2 cups on the table, though I drink from only one. The empty cup is not for a guest. It is for Daniel, who sat across from me for 42 years, who reached for my hand even when words weren't needed. The ritual grounds me. It reminds me that even though I sit alone in this house, I am never without presence. Daniel was a builder in every sense. He built homes, yes, but also stability, dreams, a life. He began with small contracts, deck repairs, roofs patched after summer storms, before moving on to larger projects along the coast. His vision was always clear: to create houses that could stand against wind and salt, against time itself. Wind and salt, he used to say, running his hand along the beams, they test everything. Over 2 decades he built a chain of beachfront villas from Myrtle Beach down to Hilton Head. They weren't hotels. They weren't glossy rentals. They were homes, solid, rooted, tested by hurricanes and mended again by his own hands. He called them the houses of wind and salt, and he loved them as though they were children born of his labor. When illness slowed him, his body betrayed him, but his mind stayed sharp. His concern was not for himself. It was for me. I remember the night he placed the trust documents into the safe. His face was pale, his breathing shallow, but his eyes still carried the grit I had seen on scaffolding 30 years earlier. "Margaret," he said, gripping my hand so tightly I felt his heartbeat through my palm. "Promise me. Don't tell anyone what I've left you. Don't sign anything. Not one page. These villas are more than money. They're the proof of what we built together." Tears blurred my sight, but I nodded. At the time I thought he was being overly cautious. Clara had always been close to me, and I believed she would never let anyone treat me as less than sacred. But Daniel must have seen further than I could. After his funeral, the house felt cavernous, though the walls were unchanged. The roses still bloomed. The kettle still whistled. The safe sat in the hallway, somehow heavier with the weight of his absence. From that day forward, I carried the brass key in my pocket. It was not just a key to properties worth $80 million. It was a key to my dignity, my independence, my future. Late at night, I sometimes sat at the kitchen table, the key in one hand, my teacup in the other, whispering into the quiet, "I hear you, Daniel. I won't sign. I won't let go." And yet, even with his words inside me, nothing prepared me for how quickly the test would arrive. A wedding where I was hidden behind orchids. A week later came the knock. A lawyer's folder sliding across my kitchen table, my spoon striking the teacup like a bell. That was the moment I understood the houses of wind and salt were not just Daniel's legacy. They were also my armor. The very next morning I heard another knock, softer, familiar. 3 taps, a pause, 2 taps. I opened the door to find my neighbor, also named Margaret, standing there with a warm pan wrapped in a dish towel. The scent of butter and corn rose between us like a small mercy. "I brought cornbread," she said, stepping inside as if she were returning a book. And I brought eyes. Something happened here. Margaret lives 2 houses down, a widow like me. She lost her husband, Frank, 10 winters ago. Her hair is kept short, her sentences shorter. She set the pan on my counter, scanned the room and noticed the 2 teacups, the one I drank from and the one left empty. Her gaze slid to the placemat covering the folder I had tried to hide, as if paper could be shamed into good behavior. Without asking, she lifted the cloth and read the bold black type, "Durable power of attorney." Her jaw didn't drop. She only exhaled through her nose the way a carpenter checks a warped board. "Who brought this?" Not a question. "Ethan," I answered. "With a lawyer." She nodded once. "A verdict without a gavel." I saw them leave. The suit carried himself like he owned your house. We sat at the kitchen table. I poured tea. Margaret refused milk. I cut the cornbread, the steam rising and softening the room. For a moment, it smelled like a kitchen again instead of a courtroom. She bit into a slice, then pointed with the corner. "Say it out loud." "They want me to sign," I said. "They say it's for my safety." Margaret chewed slowly, buying me time. She set the bread down, wiped her fingers on the towel. "Don't let silence become shackles. Turn it into armor." The words landed where my spine began. I felt myself straighten. "Armor," I repeated. She tapped the folder. "A signature like that is a door that only swings one way. Ask me how I know." So I did. He told me about the spring after Frank died. A nephew who called every Sunday, his voice sweet as honey. He said the word protection so many times it began to sound like a hymn. Then he arrived one afternoon with a notary and a bouquet. When she hesitated, he laughed, told the notary to give them a minute. She remembered that laugh in her living room. It did not belong there. She never signed. He never called again. "That silence," she said, "hurt, but it healed. The other kind, the kind where you sign to make the room quiet, that wound never closes." I slipped my hand into my cardigan pocket and brought out the brass key, turning it in my palm. Margaret noticed, as she always notices what I try to hide. She glanced toward the safe in the hallway. "Daniel left you more than paper," she said. "He left you a way to stand." I looked out the window at the roses climbing the cedar trellis Daniel had built. It still held. I heard the lawyer's words: safeguards, efficiency. I heard Daniel's words: "Don't sign." My chest tightened, not with fear but with clarity. "Ethan called me mother," I said, tasting the word thin on my tongue as if it were a key itself. Margaret snorted, dry and sharp. "People love the word family when they need a shortcut to your life. Keys belong to owners, not visitors." We ate in rhythm. Slice, sip, breathe. Margaret asked questions the way a nurse checks vitals. "Who drafted the document? Who benefits? Who holds the pen when your hand shakes?" I answered, and when I paused she gave me a list. It sounded like a grocery run, which steadied me. "Here's what you do today," she said. "Call James O'Connor, the lawyer Daniel trusted. Make a rule and put it in writing. No documents without counsel. Drafts in advance. Meetings only through your attorney. Write it on a card, keep it near your door. If they call you difficult, call it measured." I smiled, small but grateful. Margaret had a way of turning fear into verbs. She stood, walked to the shelf where the safe rested. She didn't touch it, only looked at it as if the safe itself had earned respect. "People think strength is volume," she said. "It isn't. It's paperwork and boundaries," repeated calmly. I thought of Clara, her veil drifting like a pale river, her eyes avoiding mine when the photographer arranged the mothers. I tasted the cornbread turn to salt in my mouth. "If I do this, I may lose her," I said. "You may," Margaret answered. She did not decorate the truth. "Or you may teach her the one lesson that lasts. Love without boundaries becomes theater. She will learn where love actually stands." We carried our cups to the porch. The morning was bright, the street still quiet. The roses cast shadows shaped like lace across the steps. Margaret leaned against the rail. You know what else makes armor? She asked. Other women who have done this before you. She told me about the church group that met on Tuesdays, widows and grandmothers who traded notes on fraud alerts and voice passwords, who knew how to freeze credit and thaw it, how to ask for second opinions without apologizing. I laughed once, the sound surprising me. A classroom for the retired. A classroom for the underestimated, she corrected, smiling. You taught children to stand and say their names. Now you will teach yourself to do it again. We fell into an easy quiet, the kind that holds rather than presses. A breeze came off the water, carrying the tang of salt and the faint scent of sun cream from some open window. Margaret looked at my hands. They no longer trembled. She slipped a folded paper onto the table, a phone number written in her neat block letters. Call James by noon, she said. If your voice shakes, call me first. I'll stand in the room while you dial. I reached for her hand. It was warm, dry, steady. Thank you. She squeezed once, a seal without ink. If they come again and you don't want to open the door, call me. I'll walk over with my coffee. Two women on a porch are a stronger door than oak. We returned to the kitchen. I wiped the counter, put the cornbread in a tin and slid the folder back into the light. Margaret watched me take an index card and write in clear, slow letters. I do not sign documents presented without counsel. All meetings through Attorney James O'Connor. Drafts 48 hours in advance. I taped the card beside the door. The tape crackled, a small, satisfying sound. Margaret nodded, the kind of nod that closes a chapter and opens a plan. She picked up her coat, turned at the threshold. Armor on, Helen, she said. Let them find a woman, not a signature. After she left, I stood at the sink and let the water run cold. I touched the key. I touched the card. I touched the safe. The house felt taller by an inch. I dried my hands on the dish towel and reached for the phone. James would answer on the second ring. He always did. By noon that day, after Margaret's firm words and folded paper, I called James O'Connor. Daniel had trusted him for years. James was not flashy. His office was a converted brick townhouse near the courthouse. By late afternoon his suits were rumpled, but he was steady, and steady was what I needed. He answered on the second ring, his voice low and certain. Helen, he said, I've been expecting your call. I froze. Expecting? Daniel told me you would need me. He made me promise that if your name ever came up in my voicemail, I would drop everything and come. True to his word, he was at my door an hour later. He carried a leather briefcase scratched at the edges, thick with files. His presence filled the kitchen without noise. He set the case on the table and looked at me over his glasses. Show me what they brought. I slid the folder across. He flipped through the pages, nodding as if he had seen this staged a dozen times. Durable power of attorney, he muttered. Broad language, immediate effect, no safeguards. He closed the folder with a sharp clap. They want access to everything without condition. My stomach turned. I clutched the brass key in my pocket, felt its cold bite. Daniel told me not to sign. He said I would understand one day. James leaned forward. His eyes softened, but his voice carried weight. He was right, Helen. What Daniel left you is not just money. It is not just property. It is a fortress. He built these villas the way he built his houses, layer by layer, reinforced against the storm. The trust is more than a legal form. It is his wall of stone around you. A fortress, I repeated, tasting the word. Yes. This is not a treasure to be plundered. This is a citadel to stand in. He designed it so that no one, no child, no in-law, no stranger in a suit, can take it without your consent and without the law agreeing. But fortresses need maintenance. That is where we begin, James said. He opened his case and drew out forms neatly clipped. We will record the deeds again at the county office to refresh them in your name. We will freeze your credit with the 3 bureaus so no one can open accounts against your identity. We will establish a healthcare directive naming Margaret as your proxy before Clara, so no one can use illness to argue incapacity. And we will set up a standing rule with your bank. No transactions without your personal signature verified in person. I listened as though he were teaching me a new subject. As I once taught children how to read, letters formed into words. Words formed into a shield. Each measure he described was a brick laid into Daniel's wall. Will it be enough? I asked. James smiled, just a brief curve. Enough and more. By the time we are done, you will not only hold the fortress, you will know every gate and key by heart. He placed the first form in front of me. My hand trembled slightly as I lifted the pen. I thought of Ethan's smooth voice calling me mother. I thought of Clara's downcast eyes. I thought of Daniel's last grip. I pressed the pen down. The line of my name looked like a bridge between what I had been and what I was becoming. James stamped the form with a notary seal he carried. The red ink sank into the paper with a dry final sound. That sound did not echo like defeat. It rang like a drum, steady and protective. We moved through the documents one by one. Directive, deed, bank authorization. Each signature was a breath I had been holding for weeks. Each stamp another thud in rhythm, as if Daniel himself were knocking from beyond to say, yes, this is the way. At one point I paused, pen hovering. What if Clara hates me for this? What if she believes Ethan's words over mine? James looked directly at me. Then she learns the truth slowly. Paperwork is not emotion. It is boundary. Love can return, but a fortress once breached does not rebuild so easily. You are protecting her too, whether she knows it yet or not. Tears stung my eyes, but I did not let them fall. I pressed my name onto the final page, firm and unshaken. James stamped again. When we finished, the table was covered in signed papers, small stacks forming a new architecture of safety. James gathered them with care, slipping them back into his case. I will file these first thing in the morning, he said. By this time next week, no stranger will stand a chance. I exhaled long and heavy, as though I had carried a weight across decades. For the first time since Daniel's funeral, I felt not only his absence, but his presence woven into the paper, the ink, the seal. James rose, shook my hand and left with a quiet promise. Call me before you ever open the door to them again. When the door closed, I sat alone at the kitchen table. The late afternoon sun stretched across the floor. Catching the brass key still in my pocket, I drew it out, turned it in my palm, and for the first time it felt less like a reminder of loss and more like a piece of armor. I touched the key to the folder, now stamped and signed. The house around me seemed taller, sturdier, as if Daniel's walls had risen again. I had entered this day reactive, shaken, nearly cornered. Now, with each thud of the seal still echoing in my ears, I felt the shift inside me. I was no longer the woman at the back of the wedding, hidden by orchids. I was the woman holding the fortress, and I knew I was ready for the storm. It was only 3 days after James left my kitchen with the signed papers when I heard the sound of a car pulling into my driveway. I glanced out the window. Clara stepped out first, smoothing the skirt of her dress, her eyes darting toward the roses along my porch as if they could explain her nervousness. Behind her came Ethan, his hand lightly resting at her back, guiding her toward the door with the confidence of someone who believed the ground belonged to him. I did not rush to greet them. I let them ring the bell twice, then opened the door slowly. The air between us was heavy with politeness, that brittle kind of politeness that cracks under its own weight. "Mother," Ethan said, smiling the way a salesman does when he rehearses in the mirror. "We thought we'd stop by to check on you. We worry, with you being alone in this house." Ethan's voice was smooth, but behind it I heard the calculation. "Clara insisted we come." Clara's eyes flickered at his words. She nodded, but the movement was small, almost reluctant. "Come in," I said, stepping aside. They settled at the kitchen table where Daniel and I had spent decades sharing tea. I placed cups before them, though only Clara touched hers. Ethan spread his hands wide over the wood as if claiming it for himself. "You've had so much responsibility on your shoulders," he began. The villas, the maintenance, the taxes. Clara and I just want to lighten your load. We want to take care of you. Clara reached across the table, brushing her fingers against mine. It's true, Mom. We lie awake sometimes thinking about you here. What if something happens and no one is around? You shouldn't have to carry all this by yourself. Their voices overlapped like waves, steady and insistent, words dressed in the clothes of concern. But beneath, I heard the rehearsed cadence. Ethan's tone too polished, Clara's phrases too practiced, as if they had whispered them in the car on the way over. I did not answer immediately. Instead, I stirred my tea, the spoon clicking against the porcelain in an even rhythm. Silence stretched, not awkward but deliberate, like the pause between two movements of a symphony. Inside, I thought, I hear them the way one hears wind against a window. Persistent, insistent, but never touching the core of the house. Their words rattled, but they did not enter. Ethan leaned closer. Imagine, Mother, how much simpler life could be if we handled the details. You could travel, join clubs, spend time with friends, leave the business side to us. I met his eyes then, calm and unblinking. My silence unsettled him. He shifted in his chair, cleared his throat, and tried again. It isn't about money. It's about family. We don't want you burdened, family. He said the word as if it were a key to open any door. I kept my lips closed, my gaze steady. Clara squeezed my hand gently, her eyes softening. Please, Mom. We only want what's best for you. Still, I remained quiet. I let the weight of my silence fill the room until Ethan finally leaned back, frustration flickering behind his smile. Clara withdrew her hand, folding it in her lap. I lifted my cup and sipped slowly, letting the warmth spread through me. Then I set it down and said only one sentence, my voice even. I'll think about it. Not a promise, not a concession. Only words to end the performance. They exchanged glances. Clara's full of hope, Ethan's shadowed by impatience. He rose first, pulling Clara with him. We'll check back soon, he said. His tone suggested inevitability, as though my walls were already crumbling. When the door closed behind them, I stood in the quiet, my shoulders relaxed, my breath released. I walked to the safe in the hallway, ran my fingers over the cool metal. The key in my pocket pressed against my thigh, reassuring and solid. They speak of care, I whispered, perhaps to Daniel, perhaps to myself. But it is control they crave. They speak of family, but it is possession they mean. The roses outside swayed in the breeze, their stems unbroken. I thought of Margaret's words, silence as armor. I had worn that armor today, not with anger, not with shouting, but with stillness. And though they left without victory, I knew this was not the end. Family tides pull harder than strangers. The undercurrent had begun. It was a Tuesday afternoon when I drove to the grocery store on Meeting Street. The list in my pocket was ordinary: bread, milk, tea bags, roses if they had them fresh. The kind of list that makes life feel steady. I parked near the back where the shade from an oak tree stretched across the asphalt. The air smelled of salt and exhaust, the mix of coastal wind and city traffic. I had just locked my car when I heard a familiar voice. Ethan. His voice was lower than usual, sharp at the edges, carrying urgency instead of polish. I froze. He was standing 3 rows over, phone pressed to his ear. His back was to me, his shoulders tense. I ducked behind a row of carts left crooked in their stall. The brass key in my cardigan pressed against my ribs as though it too were listening. Yes, Mom, I know, Ethan was saying, his words cutting the air like stones skipping water. I've already tried the bank. They won't extend us anymore. Not what the numbers were showing. There was a pause as Patricia, his mother, spoke on the other end. I could not hear her words, but Ethan's reply was clear enough. I'm telling you, if Margaret signs the power of attorney, we'll have access. We can refinance the villas, sell 2 or 3 quick. That will clear the debt, keep the company afloat. Without that, we're sunk. It's over. The world seemed to tilt under me. Bread and milk vanished from my mind. All that remained was the sound of his desperation, the calculation hidden beneath his false concern. He turned slightly, pacing. Yes, I know it's risky, but we don't have a choice. The creditors are circling. If Margaret doesn't sign, Patricia, we lose everything. Do you hear me? Everything. His voice cracked on the last word, raw and unpracticed. Nothing like the calm charm he had laid across my kitchen table. It was the sound of a man cornered, not a son concerned for his wife's mother. I stepped back into the shadow of the oak tree. My breath came shallow, but I made no sound. I could have confronted him there, could have let him see me and feel the weight of his own words thrown back at him. Instead, I chose silence. Silence is not absence. Silence is choice. I thought of Daniel's warning. Do not sign. I thought of Margaret's voice. Let silence be armor. I stood there in that patch of shade, invisible, while Ethan poured out the truth he never meant for me to hear. I'll get her to sign, he said after a pause. Don't worry, Mom. She's old. He's soft. She'll see reason. He just needs more pressure. Claire will help. Between the two of us, she won't resist for long. Old software words meant to shrink me. Words spoken as strategy, not family. My hand tightened around the cart handle until my knuckles whitened. I could feel the tremor of anger rising, but I did not move toward him. I stayed in the shadow, unseen. The silence was mine, and it was stronger than confrontation. A seagull shrieked overhead, landing near a dropped bag of chips. Ethan swore under his breath, turned back toward his car and drove off, still speaking into the phone. I waited until the sound of his engine disappeared before stepping out. The parking lot was ordinary again. Carts rattled. Children laughed near the entrance. A woman loaded oranges into her trunk. But for me, everything had shifted. I walked into the store, picked up bread and milk like a woman who had not just overheard betrayal. But inside, I carried something heavier than groceries. I carried the knowledge that Ethan's kindness was a costume. His marriage to Clara, a mask covering desperation. I carried the proof that this was not about me, not even about Clara. It was about debt, failure, survival, and they wanted to use me as their rescue. When I returned home, I placed the groceries on the counter. I made tea, pouring the water slowly so the steam curled into the air. I set out 2 cups as always. I whispered toward the empty one. Daniel, you were right. This was never about love. It was about desperation dressed as duty. I lifted the brass key from my pocket and set it beside the teacup. Its weight on the table was steady, immovable. I thought of Ethan's words, old, soft, and felt the opposite rise in me. I was not diminished. I was defined. I did not need to confront him in that parking lot. The truth had revealed itself and it belonged to me alone. That was enough. Silence once again had become my armor. And this time it felt unbreakable. It was late afternoon when I heard a car pull up. The engine was quieter than Ethan's truck. I peeked through the curtain and saw Clara step out alone. She walked up the path slowly, her heels clicking against the stone like hesitant knocks before her hand ever reached the door. When I opened it, I saw her eyes already red, her face pale. She clutched her purse to her chest as if it might shield her. "Mom," she whispered, her voice catching. "Please, can we talk?" I stepped aside, letting her in. The house smelled of tea and roses from the garden. She sat at the table where so much had unfolded already. I set a cup before her, but she did not touch it. She gripped the edge of the table instead, knuckles white. Then the words broke out, raw and sharp. "Why don't you trust me? Why don't you believe that I want to help you? You've always trusted me before. Why not now?" Her tears came fast, streaking her cheeks. I watched her, my daughter, the child I had once held against my chest when fever shook her small body. The girl I had walked to school on her first day. The teenager I had waited up for when she stayed out late. Every memory pressed at me, urging me to gather her in my arms, to soothe her like I once did. My hand lifted, instinctive, but halfway across the table it faltered. Instead of reaching for her hand, I set it down gently on my teacup. The porcelain was warm under my palm. My silence stretched across the space between us. Clara's voice rose, sharp with grief. Ethan says you think we're trying to take everything. How could you believe that? He's my husband. He wants to make sure you're safe. Me? I'm your daughter. Why can't you see that? Her words pierced, but I held steady. Inside I thought, I hear you, but I hear the wind too. Rushing, insistent, never touching the heart of the house. Finally I spoke, my voice low and deliberate. Clara, I do trust you. I trust you enough to have kept silent about what your father left me. I trusted you with my pride when I sat at that wedding table, hidden behind flowers. I trusted you when I believed you would still see me as part of your life. But trust is not the same as signing. She flinched. So, you don't love me anymore? I leaned forward, my hands still resting on the teacup. Boundaries are not the absence of love. They are the way love survives without being twisted. If I sign, I lose more than property. I lose the chance to still be your mother, not your burden, not your bank. By saying no, I am loving you the only way I still can. Her lip trembled. She shook her head. Ethan says. I cut in, my tone firmer. Ethan says many things. I overheard him with his mother. He spoke not of care but of debt. Of companies ready to collapse. Of using my signature as their rope. If you had heard him, you would know the truth. I know. His worry is not for me. It is for himself. Her breath hitched. She looked down, fingers twisting at the strap of her purse. You spied on us. I listened, I said. Because silence is sometimes the only way to hear the truth. The room went still. A clock ticked. The kettle hissed faintly from the stove. My daughter sat before me, torn between loyalty to her husband and the echo of her upbringing. At last she whispered, You don't forgive me, do you? My throat tightened. Clara, forgiveness is not the question. Forgiveness is for mistakes of the heart. This is about survival, about the fortress your father built to protect us. I cannot trade that away, not even for you. One day I pray you will see that I am not your enemy. I am the mother still keeping a roof over your name, even if you can't accept it yet. She covered her face with her hands, shoulders shaking. For a moment I nearly rose, nearly went around the table to hold her, but I stayed where I was. My love had to take a different shape now. A shape with walls. The truth settled heavy in the room. Trust is not the same as signing. Boundaries are the proof that love remains. Clara lifted her head, eyes swollen. She looked at me as if I were a stranger and yet something familiar all the same. I don't know how to feel, she said. You don't have to know today, I answered. But remember this. My silence is not rejection. It is protection. She stood unsteady. Her hand hovered over the table as if she might touch mine. At the last second she withdrew, clutching her purse again. She walked to the door without another word. I followed only as far as the hallway. The door clicked shut. Her car started, backed out, disappeared down the street. I returned to the kitchen, touched the cup, still warm under my palm. I whispered to Daniel, to the roses outside, maybe to myself. I chose the line today. The line that says love and loss can exist in the same breath. The house was quiet again, but inside me the conflict thundered. A mother's instinct to embrace, a woman's duty to guard. I did not know yet what it would cost. That night, after Clara left with her eyes swollen and her words unfinished, the house felt heavier than usual. The roses outside brushed against the window in the wind, but inside everything was still. I made tea and set down 2 cups, though I barely touched mine. My hand hovered over the brass key in my cardigan pocket, then slipped away. Even that anchor felt too heavy to hold. I walked to the small desk in the corner of the living room, the one where Daniel used to sketch blueprints when the dining table grew too cluttered. The lamp cast a circle of yellow light on the wooden surface. In the drawer I kept a stack of stationery, cream-colored with faint blue lines. I took out a sheet, uncapped a pen and let the ink flow. Daniel, I began, the words forming slowly. Tonight I feel both strong and broken. I stood firm as you told me to. I did not sign, but the cost of keeping your fortress intact is watching our daughter drift further from me. The pen scratched, steady but heavy. I wrote of the look in Clara's eyes, the way her hand hovered but did not touch mine. I wrote of Ethan's voice in the parking lot, sharp with desperation. I wrote of my silence at the table, how it cut through his charm, how it made me feel both powerful and painfully alone. Do you know what hurts, Daniel? I wrote. Not their greed. Not the paper they push across the table. What hurts is seeing our child, the girl we raised with bedtime stories and Sunday pancakes, look at me as if I am the enemy. I never imagined that saying no to her could feel like a betrayal, even when I know it is the only way to protect her. I paused. The pen balanced above the page as tears fell quietly, leaving small dark spots that spread until the words blurred. Still I kept writing. You built villas that could withstand wind and salt. You built them strong because you knew storms would come. But how do I build walls that can survive a storm inside my own family? How do I keep loving her without surrendering what you worked for? Tonight I fear I might lose her. And yet if I yield I will lose myself. The kettle whistled faintly in the kitchen, but I did not move. I pressed the nib harder into the paper. Daniel, I promised you I will not sign, but sometimes I wonder if I am strong enough to bear the loneliness that comes with keeping that promise. You were my partner, my compass. Now I sit here alone, writing to paper as if it could speak back. I stopped, stared at the ink, then added one more line. Silence is armor. Why does it feel so heavy on my shoulders? The clock on the wall ticked into the late hours. My tea had grown cold, untouched. The second cup sat across from me, its steam long vanished. I folded the letter carefully, pressing the creases with my fingers. My instinct was to place it in an envelope, to address it as though the mail could still carry words to the dead. But I knew better. This was not meant to travel outward. It was meant to mirror inward. I opened the drawer again and slipped the folded letter inside. It landed atop a growing stack. Letters written in the months since Daniel passed. None of them ever sent. Each one carried a piece of my heart, my doubts, my half-spoken confessions. Together they formed a diary of grief and resilience, unsent but not wasted. I closed the drawer gently, the sound soft as a sigh. Then I sat back, looking at the desk where Daniel once drew lines on paper to create walls and windows, rooms and roofs. I realized that I had been doing the same. My words were my blueprints, my silence, my walls. The night deepened. I stood, carried my cold tea to the sink and rinsed the cup. The brass key clinked against the counter as I set it down beside me. I dried my hands, then picked up the key again, slipping it back into my pocket. Its weight grounded me, not as a burden but as a reminder. Before going to bed, I touched the drawer where the letter rested. "Good night, Daniel," I whispered. The fortress still stands, but sometimes the builder needs rest. I turned off the lamp, leaving the house in darkness except for the moonlight falling across the roses outside. The silence of the night wrapped around me. This time, though, it did not feel like chains. It felt like a shield I was learning to carry. Sunday after service, the fellowship hall smelled like coffee and powdered sugar. Folding tables wore plastic cloths printed with faded lemons. Children chased each other between chairs while the choir director stacked hymnals in a neat tower. Ruth hooked her arm through mine and steered me toward a round table near the bulletin board. "Sit," she said. "Listen." 3 women made space without ceremony. Ruth wore a blue scarf and a smile that curved only when necessary. Bernice had sturdy shoes and a small diamond that flashed when she lifted her paper cup. Alpha kept a notebook with lined pages and a pen that clicked like a metronome. Ruth introduced them with the clean efficiency of someone setting a table. Ruth had raised 3 boys and a mortgage. Bernice had buried 2 husbands and 1 bad investment. Alpha had saved half the church from signing what they should not. I folded my hands around a styrofoam cup. Steam rose. The coffee was too strong and exactly right. Ruth began, her voice low and even. "After my Harold died, my oldest came with a binder, tabs and highlights. Looked like care. He said he wanted to take the load. He wanted to consolidate accounts, streamline, modernize. He used all the verbs that make a mother feel small. I said no. He did not visit for 6 months. He visits now. He brings pie. He learned that no did not mean I stopped loving him. Bernice nodded, turning her cup so the seam faced the wall. My niece showed up with a notary and a bouquet. Wanted me to sign a deed transfer so she could pre-manage the house. I put the pen down and baked a cake instead. He called me cold. I called it clear. We speak again. We do not sign again. Alpha clicked her pen twice, then opened her notebook. I keep lists, she said as if confessing to a harmless vice. When people are grieving, paper becomes wind. It blows where it wants. Lists give it weight. Freeze credit with all 3 bureaus. Add a voice password at the bank. Put a card on the door that reads, "No documents accepted without counsel." Drafts 48 hours in advance. Keep a call log. Date, time, exact words. Logs win when memories get shiny. Ruth squeezed my arm once, a silent chorus beneath the spoken one. I felt the brass key in my cardigan pocket and the ghost of the red notary thud inside my chest. I told them about the parking lot, about Ethan's voice stripped of polish, about the word old said like a strategy. Their faces did not change. Only their attention leaned forward. Ruth spoke first. Desperation wears good shoes. It knocks like family and says please. It stands very close and smells like cologne. Bernice blew on her coffee. People call it duty when they want your signature. I have learned to hear the difference between worry and appetite. Alpha tapped her pen against the notebook. 2 soft beats. What did you say to your daughter? She asked. I told her trust is not the same as signing. I said that boundaries are how love survives. Bernice's diamond flashed again as she nodded. That sentence needs to live on a refrigerator. Ruth leaned in. Her scarf brushed the table. Saying no is not fighting your child, she said. Saying no is how you stay their mother. Children cannot lean on air. The room swelled with the small noises of Sunday, spoons touching plates, the piano bench scraping the floor, a baby hiccuping and then sighing. I looked at these women and felt my shoulders lower by an inch. The loneliness that had draped itself over me since the wedding shifted. Not gone but shared. Bernice broke a sugar cookie in half and set the larger piece on my napkin. We are not here to make you braver, she said. You already are. We are here so the wind has more bodies to push against. Alpha slid a photocopy from her notebook. It was a single page printed in a plain font. At the top, a heading, Practical Comforts. Under it, lines that would look like nothing to anyone who had never weathered this kind of storm. Freeze credit. TransUnion, Equifax, Experian. Confirm by mail. Banknote, in person only. Dual employee verification. Voice password. Healthcare proxy. Primary, you trust to say no when you cannot. Secondary for backup. Door card. No documents without counsel. Drafts 48 hours in advance. Call log. Date. Time. Exact words. No summaries. Threshold rule. You do not decide at the door. You decide at the table after tea. I traced the last line with my finger. Threshold rule. It felt like something Daniel would have said while measuring a beam. Simple. Strong. Bernice tilted her head. You are a teacher, she said. Teach your daughter what a boundary looks like in daylight. Invite her to watch you pay a bill, to see the ledger, to hold a wrench while you tighten something. Let her see that you are not refusing help. You are refusing surrender. The words settled where grief had kept its chair. A different weight took its place, steadier, inhabitable. I breathed slow and deep. Ruth finished her coffee and stood, smoothing her scarf. I tell my boys this, she said. Saying no is not against you. It is how I keep myself. When I keep myself, the door stays open for a better yes later. I laughed, short and bright. There you go. Put that on the other side of the refrigerator. We lingered the way women do when the conversation has done its work, but no one wants to break the circle. Finally, Alpha closed her notebook and handed me a small stack of blank index cards. For your door, your log, your pocket, she said. Write clean. Tape corners. Watch how differently people speak when they see a rule. On our way out, the bell rang noon. Sun pulled on the church steps. The air smelled faintly of lilies left from a funeral earlier in the week. Ruth took my hand and squeezed. Bernice waved her scarf. Alpha pointed at my cardigan pocket where the key made a small square. At the bottom of the steps I paused. Threshold again. I looked back into the hall where the table still held crumbs and paper cups and the imprint of our elbows. The chorus of wisdom had not been loud. It had been precise. And in that precision, I found a kind of peace I had not felt since Daniel pressed the safe key into my palm. As we crossed the parking lot, I felt the key's weight and the lightness of company. Both truths could live in one body. I said the sentence aloud, first to myself, then to Ruth. Saying no is not against them. It is how I keep me. Good, she said. Now go home and tape it to your door. The text arrived on a Wednesday evening just as I was trimming the roses near the porch. The phone buzzed in my pocket. I wiped my hands on my apron and read the screen. It was from Ethan. Friday will bring a notary over. Just formalities. Shouldn't take more than a few minutes. For a long moment I stood there in the fading light, the scent of roses thick around me, the brass key pressing against my hip through the fabric. Formalities. That word clanged in my head like a dull bell. Daniel's voice rose in memory. Do not sign. And Ruth's warning echoed. Don't let silence be shackles. Make it armor. I walked into the kitchen, placed the phone on the counter and brewed a pot of tea. Steam curled upward, slow and calm. I set 2 cups out as I always did. Then I typed my reply. Deliberate. Every word a stone placed in a wall. Please contact Attorney James O'Connor. All meetings and documents must go through him. I pressed send. No explanation, no apology. A full stop at the end. My hands did not tremble. The next 2 days were quiet but not empty. A current ran beneath the silence, tense and expectant, like air before a thunderstorm. On Friday afternoon the storm arrived. At 3 o'clock sharp tires crunched on my gravel drive. I watched through the lace curtain as Ethan stepped out, phone in hand, his face tight. He did not bring a notary. He brought his temper. The knock rattled the door hard enough to shake the frame. I walked down the hallway slowly, each step measured. I stopped on my side of the threshold, my hand resting lightly on the doorknob but not turning it. Mother. His voice was sharp, stripped of charm. Why are you making this difficult? We're just trying to protect you. The brass key in my pocket grew warmer with each pound of his fist against the wood. I stayed silent. Silence, I reminded myself, is not weakness. Silence is choice. The knocking grew louder. Open the door. This is ridiculous. Do you know how much trouble you're causing? Clara's upset. The company's hanging by a thread and you're playing stubborn. Do you want us ruined? Is that what you want? My heart thudded but I did not move. I let his words slam against the door the way wind slams against shutters. Noise, pressure, force. But the house still stood inside me. An inner dialogue rose. If I open this door even a crack, I let him perform his script again. If I remain here behind the line Daniel built, the fortress holds. I finally spoke, my voice clear, carrying through the door but not raised. Ethan, as I said in my message, please contact James O'Connor. All documents, all meetings go through him, not me. Silence followed for a breath, broken only by his ragged exhale. Then came the pounding again, louder, furious. You think a lawyer will save you? You're old, Margaret. You don't understand how the world works. Without us, you'll drown in paperwork. Do you want to end up alone, broke, confused? I pressed my back lightly against the door, steadying myself. I am not confused, I said, calm, each word clipped. This conversation is over. The handle jerked once, twice, as though he might try to force it. My pulse leapt, but the lock held and so did I. Finally, his steps retreated down the porch. A car door slammed. The engine roared and faded down the street. I stayed there for a long while, hand on the knob, forehead leaning against the wood. I felt the line between us, the literal threshold of the door, more powerfully than any courtroom or contract could declare. On one side, desperation clawed at me. On the other, silence kept me whole. I whispered into the stillness, half to Daniel, half to myself. The line is drawn and I chose not to cross it. When I finally stepped back, the room looked unchanged. The rug in its place, the table with 2 cups waiting, the roses bending outside the window. But inside me, everything had shifted. I had stood behind the line and not moved. I walked into the kitchen, poured the tea that had cooled and took a sip. It was bitter now, but strong. I carried the second cup to the window and set it down gently, the steam already gone but the ritual intact. In that moment I understood the motif of the door, the threshold. Each time I chose not to step out, each time I stayed firm on my side, I was not just refusing entry. I was affirming presence. My house, my voice, my dignity. Later that night a text buzzed again. Only 3 words from Ethan. "We'll be back." I placed the phone face down on the counter, the brass key pressed into my palm as I slid it into my pocket. The fortress stood and so did I. That night sleep did not come easily. I lay in bed listening to the ocean wind rattle the shutters, steady and low. The house creaked the way old houses do, but I knew the sound well enough to be comforted by it. Still my mind would not rest. Images from years ago rose like lanterns in the dark, uninvited but welcome. I saw Daniel again as if time had folded in on itself. He was on the job site, sleeves rolled up, his flannel shirt sticking to his back, red and white checks faded from years of salt and sun. The air smelled of sawdust mixed with ocean spray, the peculiar perfume of his life's work. Gulls wheeled overhead. The crash of waves punctuated the rhythm of hammers. He turned to me once, his forehead damp, his smile broad and tired. "Margaret," he called, voice cutting through the clang of metal. "Smell that salt and sweat. That's the smell of permanence." He ran his hand along the beam of a half-finished villa as though he were greeting an old friend. If a wall can stand against the ocean, it can stand against anything. I watched him in memory, and in my heart I whispered back, "What about storms that rise inside a family?" The question lingered long after the flash of memory faded. I sat up, reached for the cardigan draped on the chair and slipped it over my shoulders. The brass key in the pocket knocked lightly against my side. I walked down to the kitchen, the house dark except for the glow of the moon through lace curtains. I lit a small lamp and sat at the table. 2 cups waited out of habit. I poured hot water over the tea leaves, steam curling upward like ghosts of every conversation ever held at that table. I wrapped my hands around the cup, breathing warmth into my chest. Then I spoke, not to Daniel this time but to myself. "If I sign," I said aloud, "I may keep Clara near. She may smile again. He may call me soft, generous, forgiving. But I will have lost myself. I will have dismantled the fortress he built with his own hands. I will be a guest in my own life." I sipped, the bitterness grounding me. "If I do not sign," I continued, "I may keep the fortress. I may keep my name, my dignity, the wall Daniel and I raised brick by brick. But I may lose her. I may lose Clara to resentment, to Ethan's persuasion, to the notion that her mother became her enemy." The words cracked something inside me. Tears slipped down my face and fell into the cup, a salt that joined the tea. "Daniel," I whispered, my voice shaking. "You asked me to be strong, but strength feels like breaking sometimes. You built villas to withstand storms. I'm trying to withstand one too. But it is my own daughter pressing against the walls." I closed my eyes and let the silence answer. Wrapped around me, heavy and honest. A memory rose again, softer this time. Clara at 5, running barefoot along the beach near one of Daniel's nearly finished houses. Her laughter tangled with the gulls' cries. Daniel had lifted her onto his shoulders, her hair a golden halo in the sun. I had stood nearby holding the picnic basket, thinking the world was solid, unbreakable. Now that same daughter looked at me with suspicion, her trust chipped by Ethan's words, by her own longing to fix what was broken in her marriage. And I, the mother, was left to decide. Surrender to keep her close or resist and risk losing her. The lamp's glow trembled on the table, my shadow flickering against the wall. I set my cup down and pressed my palms together. A gesture half prayer, half plea. I cannot have both, I said into the quiet. Not now. Not in this season. The brass key pressed against my thigh where the cardigan pocket sagged. I touched it, letting the cool weight remind me of Daniel's hand that last night. His grip had been fierce, his words unyielding. Don't sign. One day you'll understand. I do understand, I admitted through tears. I understand the cost. The price of dignity is sometimes distance. The price of saying no is watching the people you love walk away. The house did not answer, but it held me. The roses outside brushed the siding again, whispering in the wind. I breathed deeply, let the air fill me, and felt the sob ease into stillness. I sat there until the lamp's bulb warmed the glass shade and the tea cooled. My tears dried, leaving only the taste of salt at the corner of my lips. Finally I stood. I placed the untouched second cup by the window where the moonlight silvered its rim. I touched the doorframe as I passed, feeling the threshold beneath my palm, remembering the pounding fists of earlier that week. And I realized something. The fortress was not just paper. The fortress was me. Each time I chose not to sign, not to open, not to surrender, I became one more brick in the wall. I returned to bed, lay down, and closed my eyes. Sleep did not come immediately, but peace did. A fragile peace, but mine. The next week unfolded like a series of small, steady steps, each one firmer than the last. James and I met 3 times at his office, a space that smelled of old books and lemon oil. His desk was cluttered with files, but he handled each paper as though it were a stone added to a wall. First the deeds. He pulled out thick envelopes stamped with a county seal. We'll re-record every property, he explained. So, the chain of title is airtight. No one can slip in a claim through the back door. I signed line after line, each stroke of my pen a reaffirmation. The notary seal hit with a thud. That sound had become the drumbeat of my new life. Next, HIPAA forms. James slid them across the desk. These decide who speaks for you in a medical crisis, he said. Daniel made sure your healthcare proxy was clear, but it needs updating. Ethan has no standing now. Clara will be your primary, your physician secondary. I hesitated only for a breath before signing. The pen moved smoother than before. The seal thudded again. Then came the credit freezes. James had a paralegal dial each bureau on speakerphone so I could hear the confirmations. Equifax, TransUnion, Experian. My voice spelled out my social security number, steady and unshaken. The operators recited confirmation codes, each one sounding like a secret password. James handed me slips of paper with the codes in blue ink. Keep these safe. They're stronger than any lock on a door. We prepared certified letters too. James had me sign the bottom of each page before he slid them into envelopes, the green and white cards already clipped to the front. Return receipts, he explained. Proof of delivery, proof of action. By the end of the 3rd meeting, my hands no longer trembled when I lifted the pen. They moved with the quiet certainty of a teacher correcting a child's spelling, deliberate and calm. Back at home, I pinned each green receipt to the corkboard in my kitchen. The board had once held school photos, shopping lists, and reminders for parent-teacher conferences. Now it displayed a new gallery, each green receipt a flag of survival. They stood in rows like soldiers, and each time I passed by, I felt Daniel's hand steadying mine. Meanwhile, the world outside reacted. I heard it first from Margaret, who saw Ethan storm out of the bank downtown, his tie loosened, his jaw tight. He told me he had tried to transfer something. She didn't know what, but the clerk shook her head and handed his papers back. Later James confirmed it. Ethan had attempted to change mailing addresses and beneficiary information on one of the property accounts, But the freeze, the recorded deeds, and the attorney of record rules stopped him cold. They flagged it immediately, James said, a rare smile tugging his lips. He can't move an inch without tripping alarms now. Justice by process. No gavel, no shouting, just paper, stamps, signatures, systems clicking into place exactly as they were meant to. I imagined Ethan at the counter, his charm cracking as the clerk explained policies he could not bend, his pen hovering uselessly above a form he could not complete, his frustration spilling into the parking lot where no one cared to hear it. At home, I stood before the corkboard, running my finger over the green cards pinned in neat rows. Each thud of the notary seal, each code from the credit bureaus, each certified letter returned. Together they were louder than any argument. One evening Clara called. Her voice was flat as though rehearsed. Ethan says the bank made a mistake. He says we'll straighten it out. I listened quietly, then answered in the same tone I had written to Ethan before. Please direct everything through James. I won't be discussing documents or accounts directly. Silence hung heavy between us. I could almost hear her swallow. You really don't trust me, she whispered. I pressed my palm against the corkboard, feeling the pinheads like small nails beneath my skin. I trust you enough to stay your mother, I said softly. That's why I cannot sign. One day you may see it. She ended the call quickly. My hand lingered on the board. That night I brewed tea and sat with 2 cups again. I stared at the empty one across the table. Daniel, I murmured. The fortress held. The storm slammed but the walls did not break. The roses outside bent under a gust of wind, then straightened again. I sipped my tea slowly, the taste bitter but grounding. The house was silent except for the steady tick of the clock. The silence no longer felt like chains. It felt like judgment delivered not by anger but by order, justice by process, paper and ink becoming the quiet roar of dignity. When I rose to turn off the kitchen light, the green receipts glowed faintly under the lamp, like lighthouses lined along a shore. I knew storms would keep coming but the signals were in place. The line was drawn and I had chosen not to cross it. Late afternoon light lay across the porch like a warm shawl. I stood at the edge of the steps with the hose in my hand, giving the roses a slow drink the way Daniel taught me, close to the roots, no splash on the leaves. Water threaded into the soil and disappeared, the sound a soft hush against the hum of the neighborhood. A car eased to the curb. The engine cut. I did not turn right away. I finished the bush I was on, twisted the nozzle to a fine mist, and let it settle over the last bloom, a stubborn coral rose that refused to open all the way. Mom. Clara's voice came from the walkway, not the driveway. She had parked on the street and walked up without the drama of tires on gravel. I shut off the hose and coiled it slowly, giving my breath time to find an even rhythm. When I looked up, she was at the gate, fingers hooked over the latch, watching me as if I might vanish if she blinked too fast. We stood like that for a beat. A mother and a daughter separated by a waist-high fence, and a month that felt longer than any winter. The brass key in my cardigan pocket touched my hip. The weight steadied me. Garden looks good, she said, voice low. It's holding, I answered. Storms came. Roots remembered. She opened the gate and stepped in, careful not to brush the thorns. On the porch the screen door was propped. Not open, not closed. A door ajar. My favorite compromise. Clara lifted a small brown bag. I brought you something, she said. Inside I saw lemons and ginger, the makings of the tea I drank when sleep had edges. She had paid attention. That alone loosened something in my chest. We moved to the steps. I sat on the top one, she chose the one below. Close but not touching. A cardinal flashed red across the yard and vanished into the oak. I talked to Ethan, she said. I told him everything has to go through James now. He was angry. He said I was choosing you over our future. He swallowed. I told him I was choosing my mother over a plan that felt like quicksand. I kept my hands folded, thumbs resting on the line of my skirt. How did he take that? He said I was naive. He said you had poisoned me against him. She looked up at me. Did you? No, I said. You asked for room to think. I gave it. I let the quiet stand between us like a table set for tea. She stared at her knees. I keep hearing your sentence. Trust is not the same as signing. I tried to hate it. I could not. She laughed once, brittle and brave at the same time. I asked myself why I had been so desperate for her to sign. The answer wasn't pretty. I waited. Because I thought a signature would fix everything. Our bills, his pride, the story I tell myself about being a good wife, she said. I wanted an easy door. Your no forced me to see the hallway. Wind lifted a few petals from the nearest bloom and set them down by her shoe. He did not brush them away. I was cruel to you, she said. Not with shouting, with the kind of pressure that wears your name like a coat. I am sorry. I let air out slowly. The apology did not erase the weeks, but it laid a plank across them. I know where that pressure comes from, I said. It comes from fear dressed like duty. I have worn that coat too. She faced the yard again. I don't know what I am going to do about Ethan. I am not asking for advice. I am not asking you to fight him for me. She hesitated, then added almost a whisper, I am asking for time. You have it, I said. A minute passed. The neighborhood settled into the soft sounds of dinner beginning somewhere. A screen door squeaked and clicked down the block. Someone knocked dust from a welcome mat. The world kept its ordinary list. Clara shifted and looked up. I still think about the wedding, she said. I see you behind those flowers. I should have moved that arrangement with my own hands. I should have asked where you wanted to sit. I survived it, I said. So did you. I did not want survival, she answered. I wanted celebration that included you. There was no easy reply. I let the silence hold both truths. She reached into the brown bag, took out a lemon and pressed it into my palm. James called me, she said. He explained the trust, the triggers, the reason Dad wrote things the way he did. He did not scold. He told me he wished more daughters asked questions before they asked for pens. That sounds like James, I said. She managed a small smile. He also said I could bring you to his office next week to pick up copies of the recorded deeds. He said sometimes touching the paper helps. It does, I said. The seals sound like gavel taps without the performance. We sat with that. The sky shifted toward evening. I could smell salt in the air, a tide turning somewhere just out of sight. Finally, she said what she had come to say. I will think more. I won't press you again. I can't promise I won't be angry some days. I can promise I will not confuse anger with permission. I nodded once. Not triumph, recognition. Thank you, I said. The doors open when respect knocks. Her mouth trembled. She steadied it with a deep breath. She stood, smoothing her skirt the way she had on her wedding day, only slower as if unlearning a habit. At the gate she paused and turned back. Mom. Yes. I never stopped loving you. I felt the words land in my chest and make room. I know, I said. I kept the porch light on. She nodded, almost shy, and lifted the latch. The gate swung. The cardinal called once from the oak, a bright note. Clara walked back to her car. She did not look over her shoulder. He did not need to. I picked up the hose, turned the nozzle to mist again, and finished the last rose. When I reached the porch, I noticed the screen door was still propped. A little open, a little closed. I left it that way. I brought the lemons to the bowl, set the ginger on the counter, and placed the kettle on the flame. The brass key tapped against the table when I set it down beside the cutting board. I pressed my thumb to it, felt the cool metal, and whispered the line that had carried me through every room since Daniel's death. Boundaries keep love alive. The kettle began to sing. I set out 2 cups, one for me, one for what we were still mending. That evening, after Clara's visit, I lingered in the kitchen longer than usual. The light outside had dimmed into that fragile blue just before night, when the roses fade to silhouettes and the house hums its own quiet. I brewed the tea, set out the cups, though I had no appetite for either. My eyes drifted to the corkboard, heavy with green receipts, stamped pages, proof of battles waged in silence. But it wasn't the paper that drew me now. It was the photograph pinned in the corner. Daniel in his checkered shirt, sleeves rolled, smile steady, looking like he could hold up a storm. I pulled a slip of notepaper from the drawer and sat at the table, pen in hand. The air smelled faintly of lemon and ginger from what Clara had brought. I wrote 3 simple lines. Nothing more, nothing less. I love my daughter. I will not sign. I'm still here. Plain words, almost childlike, but as I lifted the pen they settled in me like anchors. Each line a confession and a vow. I folded the paper once, pinned it beside Daniel's photo. The edges curled slightly, leaning toward him. His eyes, frozen in that square, seemed to meet mine. For the first time in months I was not writing to the past. I was writing for the future. I stepped back, taking in the board. Green receipts, legal seals, proof of battles won without shouting, and now one small slip of paper carrying the truths I wanted. No court, no bank, no child to misread it. The house was still but not empty. The silence had shape now, like walls and windows framing a life I had chosen to keep. I walked to the porch, flicked the switch and watched the light bloom across the steps. The bulb glowed golden against the deepening dusk, shadows falling over the roses swaying in the breeze. For months, I had wondered if Clara would return, if she would step back through the threshold with questions, anger, or quiet resolve. Tonight the porch light burned for her all the same. The door behind me remained ajar, screen tilted open, letting night air in, not locked against the world, not wide open to intrusion. A line drawn but not a wall. I leaned on the railing, hose coiled neatly at my feet. Neighborhood sounds drifted in. Children finishing a game down the block, a dog barking once, then quiet. I remembered that wedding night, seated behind a column of orchids near the exit door, invisible to laughter and photographs. That memory had cut deep. Yet now, standing here with the porch light burning and the door propped, I realized something. At the wedding, I had been placed at the edge of someone else's picture, a ghost in a moment that was supposed to include me. Here, in my own home with my own boundaries, I was no longer invisible. I was the owner of my life. The circle had closed gently, like the tide pulling back to shore, not a slammed door. Inside, the slip of paper fluttered slightly under the ceiling fan. I love my daughter. I will not sign. I'm still here. The 3 truths coexisted, not canceling each other out. I touched the brass key in my pocket one last time before setting it on the table. It did not need to press against me anymore. It could rest, visible, part of the life I had chosen to guard. The kettle whistled faintly, tea ready again. I poured into 1 cup, leaving the other across the table, steam rising into the soft air. 1 for me, 1 for memory, or perhaps for hope. As night deepened, I whispered into the quiet. Daniel, I did as you asked, but I also did more. I stayed myself and I stayed a mother. The roses bent in the breeze, then straightened. The porch light hummed steadily, warm against the cool dark. I closed the door halfway, leaving the latch loose, not shut, not surrendered. A door ajar, waiting. And for the first time in a long while, I breathed without weight pressing on my chest. The fortress still stood. So did I. I will leave you with the truest thing I learned in this house, with the porch light on. I am here, I am whole, and love does not demand surrender. My silence is not surrender. It is a voice that carries farther than any shout. It drew a legal line when noise tried to blur it. It kept me whole so I could keep loving my daughter without handing over the map of my life. If you are standing at your own threshold right now, pen in one hand and your name on the other, hear this from a woman who has signed many report cards and very few mistakes. You are allowed to pause. You are allowed to ask for drafts 48 hours in advance. You are allowed to say with kindness and a spine, please contact my attorney. Dignity is not stubbornness. It is stewardship. People will tell you peace requires a signature. Sometimes peace requires a boundary. Sometimes love survives because you do not cross the line that would erase you. I love my daughter. I did not sign. I'm still here. Those three truths can live in the same room. Before we part, I wonder where you are reading this. Is it a quiet morning, coffee warm in your hands, sunlight spilling across your table, a list waiting on the fridge? Or is it late, when stories like this keep you company, porch lights glowing down your street, a kettle ready to sing? Wherever you are, I read you with gratitude. If this story touched you, consider subscribing, not just for more stories but to be part of a community that still believes in kindness, in healing, and second chances. Around here we do justice by process. We practice quiet courage. We keep the door ajar for respect. Now I ask something honest. If it were you, would you keep silent as I did, or would you sign to keep the household calm? Would you trade your name for a moment of quiet, or hold your line and trust that real peace can stand? Share your answer. Someone else reading may need the courage you have to give. At my kitchen corkboard, the green receipts still hang like tiny lighthouses. Daniel's photo smiles the way he did when a beam settled true. Next to him, my slip of paper waits, simple as breath. I love my daughter. I will not sign. I'm still here. Every morning I touch that paper before I turn on the porch light. It is my pledge to the past, my permission for the day ahead. Wherever you are, carry this story with you. Remember this: sometimes the miracle does not knock on your door. It waits quietly until you are ready to open your heart. Ready to say yes to yourself. Ready to say no to what would make you smaller. Ready to stand in the home of your own life without apology. Take care. Keep your paperwork close. Keep your kindness closer. And if you must choose, choose the boundary that lets love breathe. I will be here at the table with 2 cups. One for memory, one for hope. Porch light on, door ajar, night soft around the roses.